I think we got another one. She's running. She's doing her fitness. Bonjour. Ready to go? Should we get going? Yeah? The plan, guys, is to do the entire thing in English. But obviously, si vous avez des questions, vous êtes francophone, vous voulez qu'on parle de trucs en français, ça va me faire plaisir aussi de répondre à vos questions en français. Est-ce qu'il y en a qui préfèrent le français ici? No, easy. All in English? Ben, oui, c'est pour toi, en arrière? Yeah, OK. Ouais, hésite pas, on peut faire aussi là en franglais au besoin. Là. Works? Everybody's doing good? Yeah? Let's get to it. So as you guys can see, this is the topic of today's discussion. What I'm going to do first is introduce myself a little bit so that you guys know who is talking to you today. And then I'll give you guys the order of the day for today's presentation. Cool, so my name is Louis-Philippe Boudreau. I've been coaching for over a decade at this point. I've coached over hundreds of people. I'm a certified strength and conditioning specialist. I've worked with people from all different walks of life, so people who are just looking to introduce fitness into their weekly routine, all the way up to people who are athletes trying to perform at the highest level of their sport. And so I've coached them also in all different capacities, from big, large group training, small groups, private. So I've done a lot of everything. And at this point, I own LPCB Coaching, which is my online coaching company, where I work exclusively one-on-one with people on more like performance-oriented type of goals. So people who want to lift heavier, run faster, maybe perform in their CrossFit competitions or stuff like that. So it's all one-on-one. It's training programs, nutrition, and lifestyle coaching, and all that good stuff. And so that's mainly what I do now. So if any of you guys care about this stuff, these are some of the main certifications that I've done. But most importantly, and why we're here today, is along the way in my coaching journey, my clients would get pregnant. And so I had to learn, educate myself, do courses, do consultations with people in the field to understand exactly how it is that I'm going to help them get through pregnancy and stay healthy and stay fit and do it as well as possible. And so that's kind of why we're here today. So I want to share some of those best practices with you guys and what I've learned over the years. Cool, so far so good? Okay, so few housekeeping things before we get going. The first thing, full disclosure, I'm not a woman and I've never been pregnant. And so I understand the challenge here of me presenting to you guys about the changes that are going to happen to your body when you get pregnant or when you give birth, and not having gone through it myself. But with all of the discussions that I've had with my clients and the stuff that I've done, I feel like I have a good enough perspective to be able to talk to you guys about it. Cool, next, also, and just so we're clear, like we could call it a personal trainer. Like I'm not a doctor, I'm not a physical therapist or a pelvic floor specialist. And so there's some stuff that we need to realize, like I wanna stay within the boundaries of what I'm allowed to talk to you about. But like sometimes we kind of like have to blur the lines and we have to discuss the implications of, as an example, the reality of your pelvic floor when you're exercising and going about your daily life. And so we're gonna touch on these things, but if there's any questions that you have that are outside of my scope, I'll be able to direct you guys in the right direction for who you need to talk to for that stuff. Cool? Then there's obviously, I think it's important, now we talk about the science. My emojis are not coming out as well as I would like on the PowerPoint here, but it was like that like sleeping like emoji where it's like, okay, science a little bit boring, and then there's the practical application, which is more interesting for you guys. And so just to say, like, if some of the stuff I'm talking about is a little bit blah, make sure you yawn evidently so that I see that you guys are bored and we move on to the more interesting stuff. Cool? And then finally, who is this for? Well, obviously all of you guys. I didn't know who was going to be in front of me today. So is it new parents, new moms, people that are pregnant and really, really fit and want to know how to keep exercising throughout pregnancy, or people that don't exercise at all and maybe now are thinking, oh, why not start to get a bit more in shape? And because I've heard it's important during pregnancy to be fit and healthy. And so I'm gonna try to touch both sides of the equation in a sense, okay? And so if you guys are not really exercising right now, you'll be able to connect with some of this stuff. And if you're super fit, then we're gonna talk about you as well. Cool, but where do you guys sit on that spectrum so we have an idea maybe? Like, are you guys like super fit? Are you guys not working out too much? No exercise at all? Anybody else? I don't exercise much either.
I play tennis pretty regularly. I'm pretty addicted to it.
Yes.
So my goal is to get back to tennis as soon as possible after birth.
Okay.
Ideally, if I give birth in early September, I'd like to be back at tennis. My goal is by January.
By January,
Because her
yeah.
friends already want to register in the tournament or league.
The league starts in January.
So league is in January, so you got what? That's 3 months, 4 months?
4 months, yeah.
So we'll talk about timeline for return to exercise also afterwards, so that we'll be able to touch on that. And so mixed bag?
I just want to be more active.
Just be more active. Excellent. Cool. Now, the order of the day. So really quickly, guys, we're going to talk about, is it safe to train when you're pregnant? Then we'll talk about the benefits of exercise during pregnancy. So we're kind of answering the first point right away. But then we'll talk about what kind of exercise you should do. What should you maybe not do? We'll talk about the basics of nutrition as well. What happens to your body as you go through pregnancy.
Too much.
And a pregnancy play-by-play, which is going to be a little bit of like going like trimester to trimester. What should you be doing? What should you be thinking about? And then finally, we'll also touch on postpartum. Cool? What's that?
Postpartum depression.
That's our next one. Yeah, right after. And then the other thing that I want to do also is talk about you guys. Like, what do you guys want to know? What are the questions that you may have? So maybe we could take a second. I could jot them down on the board here so we remember them, and maybe we'll address them during the presentation, maybe after in the Q&A section. So I'll leave you guys the field if you have anything specific that you're here for.
Like I said, I want to kind of be more active. I've always been somewhat of an active person. I love sports and stuff like that, and I find like it. You love to watch? No, I like to be part of them. Well, I like to be part of them too.
Yeah?
But I know that someone was telling me like right before you got pregnant, if you haven't been super active, then you can't start super active. So I'd like to learn about that.
So like, can I train if I wasn't fit before? Kind of thing. Anybody else?
I'll tell you that running size is just for you.
It'll be my reminder. I just don't want you guys to see how bad my writing is. Anything else?
Yeah, like we're like I guess like pretty active people, and we're not sure what you're still allowed or.
What are we allowed to do? Yeah.
Especially like your core exercises or.
What can
How much is like too much?
and can't do. Great. We'll definitely talk about that. And that's it. Easy. Let's get into it. And obviously, guys, a lot of you guys were saying, yeah, not super active, not exercising too much. And we'll talk about like what's the best practice. What would you do in an ideal world? And then obviously you guys adapt it to your situation. If you're like, yeah, well, he's saying like you should lift weights twice a week and then do cardio and whatever. Like, when the hell am I going to fit this into my schedule? Remember, like, a little bit goes a long way, and you do what you can. But at least you know like the framework around it, and you apply it to your reality. Cool? And if anything comes to mind as we're going through this, guys, interrupt me, ask the question, we'll put it on the board, we'll answer it right away. I'll get through the boring stuff right away so that we can move on to some more interesting things here. But this is essentially like we're talking here about like, is exercise safe for during pregnancy? And so this is kind of like, I copy pasted the position stand from like both the Canadian and the American Association of Obstetrics and Gynecology. And so what they're saying essentially is that most pregnant women, even those who have never exercised before, will benefit from low to moderate intensity physical activity. We'll define that of 150 minutes over a minimum of 3 days per week. Okay, so right away, yes, you should be exercising. Yes, you should be exercising even if you weren't exercising before pregnancy. Okay, pregnant women who do not have any health contraindications should be incorporating a variety of aerobics or cardio, resistance training activities, yoga, and some gentle stretching. And women who habitually engage in vigorous intensity aerobic activities, so if you're really fit before pregnancy, can continue these activities during pregnancy and the postpartum period. So we'll try to put some boundaries around that, but it's definitely safe to still do some intense stuff. Okay, so that's important not to be super scared about being fit when you're pregnant. Cool? And so first point, question answered. Yes, it's safe to exercise during pregnancy. Another kind of boring slide here, which you can find all of this stuff online, but why? What are the health benefits of being fit and healthy when you're pregnant? There's a higher incidence of vaginal birth. There's lower incidence of stuff like excessive gestational weight gain, gestational diabetes, hypertension, preterm birth or cesarean birth, lower birth weights, and then some of the health benefits. I'm reading quickly because this is like the boring stuff, but helps support better sleep, helps with mood and energy, helps you maintain a good body weight, helps with constipation, bloating, back pain, which we know are stuff that are typically common during pregnancy, and helps you gain strength in preparation for labor. So there's all good reasons why you should be living a healthy lifestyle when you're going through pregnancies and some of the benefits. Now that this is kind of out of the way, we can start to get a little bit more practical here and talk about some of the form of exercises that we may want to do during pregnancy. So we've got our very fit-looking girl here doing elliptical, and we're going to kind of try to define that and create boundaries around, okay, what kind of cardio can I do when I'm pregnant? And so what is recommended is to spend most of your time training moderately hard. What does that mean? Right, 70 to 75% of your VO2 max. Again, what does that mean in plain English? If we had to define it, you're essentially exercising tennis, right? You're exercising at an intensity that is not very intense, that you can hold for a very long time. How long are your tennis sessions? An hour to 2 sessions, an hour to 2 hours. We're moving for that extended period of time. I have enough energy to go through that at that same intensity, right? A weight, which is actually a very scientifically sound way to kind of guesstimate that intensity, is if you're able to hold a conversation while you're doing it, right? Typically we say like at least like if you were to try to string 12 to 15 or plus words together as you're going through the exercise, then you're training in that what we call that intensity zone. Okay, so you try, let's say you're a runner and you're jogging and you're having a conversation with the person next to you. This is moderately hard activity. Okay, so if you're spending a good amount of your time in that intensity zone, then you're good to go. You can do a lot of it, right? We talked about that 150 minutes a week. If you're doing it for 40 minutes, maybe even more in a row, that's also totally fine. And if mommy was pretty fit before, like we said, you can train harder. And harder would mean like you're still able to string a few words together, right? You don't want to hold a full conversation because like you're panting and it's challenging. You can do that. There's not necessarily contraindications around it. Like it's not unsafe to exercise more intensely in that sense. But then the question becomes, okay, what's your goal right now? Is your goal to be an elite athlete, or is your goal to grow and nurture a baby? So probably most of your energy needs to go towards that and less towards training. But if you dabble in it, totally fine. And the good rule of thumb that I like to use is for every 3 to 4 easier, moderate, hard workouts that you do, you could do one more challenging one, as an example. Okay, and that fits like a pretty good framework of what would be acceptable. Cool, so that would be for the cardio portion of training during pregnancy. And if we wanted to give you guys some examples of that, it could be sports, it could be elliptical, bike, rower. On a rowing machine though, eventually like your belly starts to get in the way, so you have to stop doing it. But that works super well at first. Swimming, running is also a great one, but typically we say if you are a runner, if you consider yourself a runner, so if you ran before you got pregnant and you're good at it, you can keep running. If you've never ran before, now you want to be fit during pregnancy, and then you're like, okay, I'm going to start running. Probably not the best one to choose. Like it's high impact, it's tougher on the body, and so it's recommended not to start running when you get pregnant. And then mixed circuit, like CrossFit stuff or mommy wads, if you guys are aware of what CrossFit is, but done in a way that's like more in tune with someone who's pregnant. And so maybe like if I give you an example, like a 30-minute circuit of a few minutes on a cardio machine, like the ones we've outlined here. Then I get off, I do a lower body exercise. Then I do an upper body exercise. Then I do an appropriate core exercise. And then I rotate through that continually at a moderate intensity for 30 minutes. That would be an example of like a mixed circuit here. So those are all examples of ways that you can incorporate cardio into your daily exercise routine. Cool?
Low impact.
Sorry?
Low impact.
Low impact is the name of the game here too. And we'll talk about also like when you should start taking away the impacts and stuff like that in a bit. Yeah. Now, this is just a graphical representation of what we were talking about. Most of your time is spent in the easy to moderate here, so you can string full sentences. Somewhat hard, once in a while. And then really, really hard. It's not like we know for sure that it's bad, and so it's not like if you step into the really hard stuff 1 second, and suddenly it's like, oh my God, I did something bad to myself or the baby. So you don't have to worry about that. But it's more like, okay, like I said before, why do we have to train like an elite athlete right now? Like this is not the season of my life to do it. So we typically say, so you define it with the talk test of like, you can't talk right now, like don't even talk to me. I can't talk, don't talk to me. We don't really need to do that anymore, essentially. Okay? But I wanted to mention it because I want to remind you guys, hey, like we don't need to freak out about it either. Cool? Then there's the other side of exercise, which is resistance training. Remember we said resistance training maybe twice a week, right? Which could be included in our 150 minutes per week. What kind of resistance exercise is good and is safe? Like that's part, I think, of your question you were saying before, like what should I do, what should I not do? What are we thinking? Like is it safe to do a lot of this stuff? I'm asking a question so I get to take a sip of water. Yeah, but to a certain point, but to an extent.
Yeah, well, like I said, as long as you're able to moderate the hard.
Yeah.
That you're able to do it for like 30 minutes without the.
Yeah. So then moderate to hard, how do we define that when it comes to resistance training? It's maybe going to be a little bit different. And typically in resistance training, like what we do is we compare it to what they call like your repetition maximum. So it's like if I tell you, okay, come over here, we're going to put the table, the projector, everything on your back. You're going to do a squat. What's the heaviest thing you can do for one? And if I tell you to do another one, it's so heavy that you can't do it. That's your repetition maximum. So if we're conceptualizing it that way, what they say is it's safe to lift weights that are at 80% of that repetition maximum. So if you think about it, it's probably still really heavy, which means that lifting weights when you're pregnant is still safe because most of you guys are probably not even going to lift that amount of weight, right? So in theory, all of that stuff is safe. And then what we're going to do after is talk about more like how do you individualize it? How do you figure out what's safe for you? And so if you're training at 80% of your repetition maximum, you're probably able to do 6 reps, maybe 7, even 8 reps at that specific weight, and you're able to keep going, right? And so we're talking about, essentially the way we could put it is you're always talking about lifting weights and keeping a little bit in the tank. So if some of you guys don't even lift weights right now, like you're probably not going to train to failure, right? To a point where you can't lift anymore. So right away, you're good to go. You exercise when it starts to be hard, when you're like, I feel the burn, but I could keep doing a few more, then money. We're doing something positive, we're gonna strengthen our muscles, but I'm not doing it to a point where I'm overexerting myself or putting pressure. We'll talk about your pelvic floor after or stuff like that. All right? And then what we typically recommend is to choose exercises and amounts of weights that you're familiar with and that allow you to regulate pressure properly, which is something that we're gonna talk about later is super important. And again, you wanna avoid creating an intense amount of pressure. So that would be like, if I'm lifting and then I take a big breath, I squeeze as hard as I can to be able to do the work, then obviously that's too much and that would probably be too hard. Cool? Yes? Now, so in short, really quickly, if you aren't really fit, start now. Start doing something, right? A little will go a long way. Walking, easy cycling, lifting weights twice, maybe 3 times a week. Doesn't have to be much. One exercise for each kind of muscle group or movement pattern. In the Q&A section, we can look at all of that if you guys want. Right? If you're already fit, you keep doing your thing. Right? You accept that you'll progressively need to reduce the stuff or constrain the amount of stuff that you do over time throughout your pregnancy, and that's totally fine. And the golden rule, you listen to your body. Okay? Any questions so far?
So like would a 10-pound weight for my hands be good since the baby comes out at like 8 to 9 or 7? Just like
So should I do, we call that sport-specific training, prepare myself for the demands of holding the baby? Yeah, for sure. Yeah, most definitely. And then if you think about it, if your arm is able to do that with 10 pounds, then you're probably able to take 20 pounds and do squats because your legs are stronger, right?
Okay.
And I've coached women that were lifting over 100 pounds on their back while they were pregnant, like doing a squat, stuff like that. They were doing that before they got pregnant, probably even more, like maybe they're lifting 150, 160, 170, and now they're backing off slowly. But definitely that 10-pound weight for your arms is good.
And then like progress from that 10 pounds.
Yeah, and you think about it, like anyone that I would train, it's like, okay, what's your situation right now? What are you able to do right now? Let's take you from here to just a little bit more over time as your body gets better. You can still get better during pregnancy, especially if you're not, like as an example, lifting weights or doing too much cardio right now. As you start exercising, your body's still gonna get fitter. And so you could still exercise and get better. You're not pushing the upper boundaries of like maximal capacity. 10 pounds. Any other questions?
So like, if I want to incorporate this, like I work during the week, so like I could try to maybe fit some workout time in the morning before I go to work 2 times a week.
Yeah.
Would it be like a 30-minute or a 15-minute?
30 minutes would be great.
Okay.
If all you have is 15, great.
Okay.
30 minutes would be good. In 30 minutes, you'll probably have time to do, and we can break this down after, but like 3 sets of, let's say, 10 to 15 repetitions of something for each body part in a circuit. And that would be super good to do. Cool? Everybody else is good? You guys want to talk a little bit? I mean, I'm going to force you guys to talk about nutrition. Okay? And if we're going to talk about nutrition during pregnancy, we're probably going to have to talk about what good nutrition means in general. Because when you're pregnant, you're still a human. You still kind of have to eat like a human. And so the 2 ways that I would, if we're trying to simplify this stuff, define it is through food quality and then food quantity, and I'm calling them like your proportions, like the portions of stuff that you're eating, right? And so food quality means primarily eating whole foods, limiting the processed foods that you're consuming. And so if we had to put it in like one sentence, we're talking about mainly eating lean meats, fish, fruits and veggies, oils, nuts and seeds, whole grains, and limiting is important. We're not talking about eliminating, talking about limiting the amount of sugar and processed foods that you're consuming for the most part. And so if you just follow this simple rule and you look at your day and you're like, is most of the food that I'm eating in here and I'm limiting this stuff at the end of the sentence, then you're probably good to go. And then the next thing you do afterwards is you can start to figure out, we'll talk about quantities a little bit here. We could get tactical at the end too if you guys want. But remember that you don't want to be eating too much, but you also want to be eating enough. right? You guys are, and we'll talk about it in a sec, but you're eating for two now, so you have to eat enough to feed yourself as well as feed the baby. And so eating enough is gonna allow you to get a variety of nutrients. So we're talking about your macros, right? So all of your protein, your carbs, and your fats, so you get enough of all of that good stuff, as well as the micros, so the vitamins and the minerals and all the things that are important for life, daily function, and the growing of the baby. Okay, so in simple terms, if you're eating to a decent amount, like you feel full at the end of your meals, you're trying to have at least 3 whole meals and then maybe a snack here and there if you're hungry, right? What we said, the golden rule, listen to your body. And most of that food is coming from quality foods, then you're probably good to go. Okay, we don't have to make it more complex than that. We can though if you guys have questions afterwards, okay? But I think it's important to try to simplify this topic because I feel sometimes people try to make it too complex. As a side note, if you guys want to dig a little bit deeper, you guys can, this is a shameless plug for my podcast. I did an entire series on these things. So like I'm doing a podcast on each of these topics. So if you want to like geek out and really get into the nuts and bolts of this thing, you can go listen to it and you'll get all your answers there. But some guidelines here. Like we said, you're eating for 2, so you have to take that into consideration. You're going to gain some weight during pregnancy, and for an average woman, this is the average typical that you can expect in terms of weight gain. And then this means that over the course of your pregnancy, especially during like the 2nd and the 3rd trimester, you may need to increase the total amount of foods that you're eating, and if we're quantifying it, maybe something like 300 to 500 extra calories per day, maybe. Okay? And then protein, a quick mention here. The same way protein is the building block of your muscles, is the building block of the baby. And so making sure you're eating enough protein, right? Typically, if you're eating enough already, like adding an extra 25 grams per day, which is the equivalent of like a small chicken breast, like is probably the amount that you should be increasing your protein intake by if you wanted to do it as best as possible.
Which yogurt is that?
Greek yogurt, like maybe a bit more than a cup.
Okay.
A bit more than a cup of Greek yogurt. And then just quick mention of like your prenatal, your broad spectrum multivitamins. Your doctor's probably going to recommend that. And typically what they say is like if you're thinking about conceiving, then you should right away start supplementing, just as like a precautionary thing.
Just a small question. Like,
Yes.
My first trimester, I was terribly sick, and I couldn't eat vegetables. I like to eat vegetables, but I just couldn't do it. So I increased my fruit intake.
Mm-hmm.
Is that okay? Like, does that compensate for vegetables?
Super okay. Like it's not the same,
Yeah.
like all of the same vitamins and minerals. So if we're thinking, okay, like if I want to get like all of my stuff, like obviously you can supplement, right? You can also use stuff like you can try like first of all, let's back up one step. It's not the end of the world. If you can't eat it, you can't eat it. There's nothing we could do about it. Now, let's say you're trying to optimize and you're like, I need to get my nutrients. Then maybe what you'd try is like a green supplement, a greens powder, so you get some of the like vegetable like nutrients without eating vegetables, and you bump up your fruit content. And then obviously like all the other stuff, like when you're having meat or fish, there's a lot of nutrients in that as well. And with all of that, you're probably going to be good to go. You know what I mean? Yeah, but you do what you can. You experiment. Are there some vegetables that I can eat? Okay, double down on those. And then the one you can't, you can't. Yeah,
Thank you.
So,
you're welcome.
what if you're already overweight when you were before getting pregnant, and
Mhm.
then now that you're pregnant, how much weight gain should you get? That is not too much.
I'm not sure.
For example, if I'm already
Yeah.
like 10 pounds over my ideal body weight,
Yeah.
and then now that I'm pregnant, should I still gain 25, 35 pounds?
I would say so, yeah, I think so. Yeah. That being said, if you start exercising and like you're losing a little bit because of the exercise and then you're gaining because of the baby, where is that going to put you? Who knows, you know? But to answer your question, then you could talk to your doctor about that. But I think like whatever you're supposed to gain because of the baby, you gain, and that's it, irrespective of your starting point. But ask your doctor.
Yeah.
Okay. Next one. talk about food cravings for a sec. Like it's normal. You get the weird cravings, but you also get maybe like the urge to eat more stuff and more stuff that's appealing to you. Just a quick mention that it's okay, right? You can satisfy your cravings, but it's important just to remember that it's probably not like a get out of jail free card. Like, like now you're kind of using the pregnancy as an excuse to like eat whatever you want in a sense. A rule I like to talk about is like the 10% rule, to come back to what we were saying before. 90% of your day is good, and then there's 10% that it's the stuff that you want to eat. Cool? Then let's talk about the nausea stuff. This is like, I wanted to put it in there because this is all stuff that I've learned through like precision nutrition. I've used it with varying levels of success with some of my clients. And so it's like for you to experiment with that stuff and see what works well. But we're talking about B6 supplementation, adding ginger to foods, not like a ginger pill or supplement, but really like in a drink or in your food. Frequent small meals can help. Eating enough protein, to come back to what we were talking about before. Limiting high fat foods, as it can have an impact on that. Salty foods in the morning, and sour or tart liquids like lemon water, all stuff that you can try that may or may not help. Another one that I've heard of too is like your prenatal. Some of those prenatals can trigger like nausea in some women. So maybe experimenting with a different one, talking to your doctor about it, that could be another way also that you can help to try to see how it helps with the symptoms here. Oui. Yes.
I took ginger tea.
Yeah. And it did help for you? Yeah, there you go. So yes, I'm glad that you say that, because you never know. Like for some women, it's like no matter what they do, like nothing helps. But you try it and then you see from there. And then I just, because I like to geek out on this stuff, I'm briefly adding like a quick like nutrient watch list here. If you guys want to take a screenshot or anything, and it's not to get too like overzealous about focusing about specific nutrients here, but these are certain things that are really important when you're going through pregnancy, certain nutrients. Like if you're eating a variety of stuff like we talked about, whole foods, and plus you have your prenatal, whatever, you're gonna get your bases covered. But I feel it's useful to sometimes, do a quick Google search, what foods are rich in this, what foods are rich in that, and then you realize, oh, I'm a vegetarian, I'm actually not eating that much B12, iron, iodine, omega-3, and zinc, depending on like what kind of vegetarian you are, like if you're eating fish or not. So, okay, so maybe I should consider like either supplementing with that stuff or finding vegetarian options of foods that are rich in those to kind of bump up my intake. So I just wanted to mention it for you guys here. And that kind of sums up the quick intro on nutrition. Do you guys have any questions before we move on to the next section? No? How are we doing on time? Pregnancy play-by-play. So in this section here, what I'm going to do is we're going to go through, I kind of broke it down into first trimester and then second and third trimester as the same category. So we'll talk about some of the guidelines you can start to follow in your exercise routine throughout the different trimesters, and I'll also sprinkle in, like, we'll talk about some of the changes that happen to your body when you're pregnant and how that impacts afterwards, like the exercise that you're going to be doing. Okay, so just a quick reminder here that the first trimester is always hit or miss, in the sense that some women like feel super fine and some are really tired, really sick, have a lot of nausea, and that's obviously going to impact your ability to stay healthy and exercise. If you're limited, you do what you can, right? You do what you can. On days you feel better, you do a bit more. On days you don't feel great, you don't do much, and that's okay, is the point I want to make. Second trimester, typically we feel a lot better, and then you can do more at that time. That's totally fine, okay? So the main message, or the take-home message during the first trimester, is just that you kind of keep doing what you're doing. You don't need to change a whole lot when it comes to your habits and your exercise. Some of the stuff, though, that you may want to start considering to avoid are exercises that greatly stretch and crunch your abs. Like, so if you're going in really extreme positions, right, of extension, or like extreme positions of flexion, like you can still do a sit-up or something like that at the beginning. But you want to start to avoid the stuff that, like I said, is bringing you to those extremes. Running and jumping, so more high impact stuff. If you're not used to that stuff, we can start to eliminate them. And then movements that will have you hit the ground really forcefully. So if any of you guys like to do burpees, right? So you throw yourself on the ground, smash maybe yourself even on the ground, stand back up. You're smashing yourself on the ground. Probably not the best thing that we could do, but aside from that, everything is kind of fair game. Cool? You're just kind of taking into consideration what we said. Okay, now you're pregnant, lifting like really, really heavy weights that are going to force you to do what we call a Valsalva maneuver. So that's that big like, I'm preparing with all my might to do the task. That's probably like a bit too extreme for what we're looking to do. So we can refer back to the guidelines I gave for lifting weights before. And now at this point, you're thinking about not going all out anymore. So I don't need to really push it to my limits. And everything aside from that is really good. In terms of like general recommendations, consider like including a good progressive warm-up when you want to exercise, something that's going to take you from resting to like exercise level like progressively, just so that like the changes in terms of like body heat, heart rate, and all that stuff, your body gets a chance to adapt to it progressively. And then also hydration, super important throughout the day. And then have snacks. If, let's say you go to the gym, have snacks in your gym bag, just because like blood sugar regulation at this point, it can get a little bit more tricky. So if you need to just grab something quick, have a quick bite when you're exercising, that could be a really useful thing to do. So that's kind of the idea behind the first trimester. So not much that needs to change here, as you guys can see. Any questions?
Like a warm-up could just be like the bike for 15.
Exactly. Yeah, it could even be bike for 5 to 10 minutes is probably going to be plenty. Like something that I like to do is like a ramping protocol. So you start really easy on the first minute, you go a little bit faster every minute until you feel like, yeah, I'm ready to go. And typically when you're ready to go, like you're also more like pumped up to train in a bit, like you're more awake. Okay, good. I'm good to go. I'm ready to crush it. The first change that's worth noting that's going to happen, we're stating the obvious here, your belly is growing. And so if your belly is growing, stuff that will kind of come with are and this is more relating to your posture, which will tie into what we're going to talk about for the next trimester. Like you're going to start to be more arched, right? You're going to be like, your ribs are going to be more arched. Your hips are going to probably be more tilted forwards. Your shoulders may start to round forward, which is in turn like causes some tightness in your back, potentially causes some tightness in the front of your hips, tightness in the hamstrings. So these guys, and then in turn sometimes like a bit more of a forward, I'm exaggerating everything here, forward neck posture. So those are all things that are normal and that happen when your belly is growing. But what we could do though is we can think about, okay, so what am I going to do in my training program to kind of do the opposite of that? Not that I want to fix all of this, but just because it's like you're trying to create a certain amount of like balance in the force, kind of thing. And so we have to consider these. So that's the first thing that happens in terms of the changes that you'll go through, and which brings us to some of the recommendations for second and third trimester. So you're starting to stay away from stuff that is likely to hit your belly, right? So if some of you guys are lifting weights and like the bar could come like in front here, movements that could make you trip or fall, which is obvious. Like we're already eliminating like bouncing stuff, plyometrics, but like obviously like a box jump is maybe not the smartest thing to do. If you clip yourself, you fall. Heavy single leg stuff, like one thing that happens during pregnancy is your body starts to secrete a hormone called relaxin, and this is kind of to facilitate like the growing and the changes that happen, but it also makes your joints a little bit more lax. And so if we're thinking about single leg exercises, like you're kind of stretching your hips in like these different angles on both sides. And so if you're lifting heavy and you're in this position, heavy is heavy, like that can put a little bit of strain on like the low back or the hips and be uncomfortable. So I typically recommend to avoid the heavy stuff, but that's more for my women that like have been working out heavy for a long time and really push it. For you guys, if most of you guys are kind of not doing like a huge amount of working out. If you start doing lunges and stuff like that, like that's totally okay. Jumping and sprinting, same thing. And then hanging movements could be a hit or miss because now you're stretching this whole thing a lot. Okay, so it could be one that is not super recommended. And then there's also talks about lying down, like when I'm exercising, because it's safe to lie down when I exercise. You guys ever heard of that? No? So some people say, okay, well, if you're lying down, that there could be like some impact in terms of like restricting blood flow, either to mama or the baby when you're doing exercises in a supine position, so when you're lying down. If you're not there for a super long time, if you're not pushing maximally, and you get out of position, you don't feel dizzy or anything like that, it's not necessarily a big issue. If you want to follow these guidelines and play it conservative, like get on an incline bench instead of a bench that's lying down, and you'll be fine. But if you're doing some light core exercises and you're on your back, it's totally okay. Cool, so I just wanted to mention it. And so what should we be focusing on? Coming back to all the changes that happen in our body, you want to straighten your bum, straighten the glutes. You want to strengthen your upper back. Right? We're talking about those shoulders here. You want to do stuff that you row towards your body so that you strengthen the muscles in your back. You want to stretch the pecs, so the muscles in the front. That's because the shoulders want to go here, so you want to stretch them here. You want to stretch your upper back, either through like some rotation stuff or opening. And again, at the end, like if you guys want, like I'll get on the ground, I'll show you guys examples of that. You stretch the front of the hips, and you're starting to do more core stuff that's less about like moving, you know, like a crunch, a V-up or something like this, and more about staying still. So you're teaching your body to resist movement instead of creating movement. And we'll talk about why in just one slide. And also something that I do with all of my women, actually with most of my athletes, is doing some breathing exercises. All right, just to help you be good at like pressure management and not sending all of the tension down below like into your pelvic floor. Practicing to breathe and getting air, we call it like 360 degrees, like getting air forward, getting air to the side, like expanding your back when you're inhaling so that you're more likely to do it when you're exercising. Those are all stuff that are really important, okay? We could do a clinic on breathing too if you guys want after. Another noteworthy change that will happen during pregnancy is diastasis. Are you guys aware of this?
I feel it.
Feel it?
Feel it.
Yeah? First pregnancy?
Yes.
Okay. So this diastasis is something that will happen. I think they say it's like at 36 weeks, like 100% of women like experience it. And what it is essentially it's a stretching of the connective tissue that kind of keeps your abs together. So your six pack here, like this is my six pack, 8-pack as you can see. That stuff, the linea alba they call it, so it's that white sheet in the middle, the connective tissue here, the fascia, it kind of gets stretched out just because the belly's pushing outwards like this. So it gets stretched out and creates this kind of like, we could call it an opening, I guess. You could see like the different types here. And so this stuff essentially stretches your abs apart from what should be normal. And so this is going to happen. It's going to impact how we're going to train. We'll talk about it. And it also impacts recovery after pregnancy. That's really, really important.
Is it painful?
It's not painful per se, no. Okay, and there's different levels and size and amounts of it that you may or may not feel. Okay, so why we want to know this? Because we want to take it into consideration, because even though it does happen and it's normal, we don't want to stretch it more than we have to make the process of recovery harder after pregnancy. Okay, so how would you test for it? And there's a bajillion videos on YouTube you guys can look up if you want, but if you lie down on your back and you kind of crunch forward to kind of exacerbate that position, you can use your fingers and you can palpate and you'll see above, below my belly button, how much space is there, like 1 finger, 2 finger, 3 fingers, like how deep is it? And you know, like typically when you push right now, like there's potentially like just a certain amount of like resistance and give, like, or it pushes back. And then when you find your diastasis, it's like you could get in there. Okay? So watch a video on YouTube, do it to yourself, and you'll know where it is and how big it is. And then another one that's important is changes and more challenges that happen around the pelvic floor. Okay, so the pelvic floor are essentially all these muscles down below that control for continence and support like your pelvic organs. So all of these muscles down there are under a little bit more, we could say, stress, because there's now a belly in the front, a baby inside, and there's a lot more pressure going down in that direction. And so we want to take that into consideration, because we want, like, throughout our exercise, not to exacerbate, again, all that pressure going down below. We want to make sure we're distributing it evenly so that we don't put excessive strain on the pelvic floor here. Okay, so that's another important change, and we'll talk about how we apply that to training in the next slide. I need to drink water, so you have a question? No?
Well, my doctor recommended like the start of the third trimester to consult a pelvic floor therapist.
Yes.
And even after also.
Yes, and I was going to mention that later. My personal recommendation is, if I had my way, I think every woman should see a pelvic floor specialist, like when they go through pregnancy and after. I think it's just a great way to set yourself up for like being back on track and successful in your fitness journey especially after pregnancy. So most definitely, I would second what your doctor recommended. And that stuff, like, they're going to go into great level of depth and details in terms of what to do. But what we can do when we're talking about training, though, is take into consideration, okay, what's going to make it potentially worse, and make sure that we don't do these things. Or also what we can do to support it, right? If your pelvic floor specialist is going to talk to you about how to specifically train your pelvic floor, what we could talk about is more like, okay, realizing that the pelvic floor in general, like, that's how I was taught. Like, I did a course by a physical therapist on that stuff, and what she used to say was always like, okay, your pelvic floor, a way to conceptualize it is like your pelvic floor likes to take over when other muscles are not doing their jobs. And so if I don't have strong muscles around my hips, right? Think of your glutes, think of your abs as an example. If those guys are not doing all the work, then maybe the pelvic floor is going to take over a little bit. So a great way to alleviate some of that stress is to make sure that you have strong muscles everywhere else. So training intensity should definitely be primarily easy to moderate, right? Recognize that your movement library is going to narrow progressively, right? As you're going to monitor for pressure management, which are the next two points here. So as you get more pregnant, and you're working out, what you're going to start to have to do is pay attention to what's going on in your body. Like on the front side, there's your diastasis, and because it's stretched out and it's open, there you're going to see it. Like, if there's a lot of pressure going in that direction, you can notice a little bit of doming or bulging out. Like, and that stuff is going, like, it's almost like a little bubble in a sense. And like, that stuff is going to happen. Like, you'll notice when you're super pregnant, like, you're sitting on the couch and then you kind of come up, and then it's like you see a little bit of like a doming happening. Like, that's part of the game. But like, if you're in the gym and every single rep that an exercise you do like pushes out and creates like this doming, then you're kind of, every time it's like a little assault, like you're stretching it a bit. If you're doing repetitively, then eventually that can stretch it more than it otherwise would, like we said. So you want to avoid that. So on the front side, you're monitoring for this. And when exercises or weights that you do are too heavy or too hard, then what happens? You got to lower the weight, you got to change the exercise. Okay, so if you monitor for signs of bulging, you'll be good to go. And then on the pelvic side of things, this is like the best way I can, like I said, like, I'm a man, so I'm describing it as well as I can to you guys, but it's, if you're feeling like down below, feelings of, like, they describe it as bearing down, or abnormal sensations down below, feelings of heaviness, or more noticeably leaking or pain, first of all, talk to your physical therapist and doctor, but also those are all indications of like, okay, I'm putting too much pressure down here, so I have to either change my strategy, learn to get pressure up here, I gotta change my exercise, I gotta lower the weight, I gotta adjust the stuff that I'm doing. So your movement library, we could call it, is slowly starting to narrow the more you go forward in your pregnancy. So again, just pay attention and listen to your body. And so remember what we said before, like 80% of your maximum or whatever, that's when you start to pay attention to what's good for you. This weight that I'm lifting it for 12 reps. I could probably do it for 15 reps. Amazing, I'm not working too hard. 4 weeks later, I'm lifting the same thing, feeling heaviness, or I notice a bulging. Okay, I gotta change something now. I gotta adjust a little bit. Okay? Questions? Then we'll talk about postpartum. No? And then I wanna make sure we have time for questions or demos or all of this stuff. So, return to training. Return to training. The name of the game here is you have to take your time. You have to go progressive with it. We'll talk about a timeline in a sec, but that 4 months is plenty. Like you've got room, you're good to go. Yeah, especially if you do your homework, you do some strengthening exercises prior, then you'll be super ready to get back into it. Okay, so you take your time and you realize that it's not because you can do something that you should be doing something, okay? You gotta let your pelvic floor and your core catch up because these guys were working super hard during pregnancy, labor, all that stuff. And so these guys worked harder than everybody else. So even though your body is able to, the other muscles are able to do all the stuff, your pelvic floor and your core, they're maybe not ready. So first we gotta train them a bit. We gotta get them back on track. We gotta get them catching up. And then we can start to train a little bit harder for all the other muscles. So that's really important. And you gotta keep monitoring for signs of diastasis or issues, pressure down below with your pelvic floor. And that's gonna dictate if you're ready to do an exercise or not. Okay? One that I like to talk about too in my clients is like focus on stress management, sleep as much as you can, and in recovery, right? As just a reminder that you're in a period of your life where the biggest priority is to nurture and take care of your baby. It's not for your fitness, and so your fitness kind of is supposed to support that, not take away from that, take away your energy, take away your time, take away all these things. So you only start with a little bit, and you build it up gradually, and you focus on the what I call like the working in stuff, the stuff that's gonna recharge your batteries, and not all the stuff that's going to use all the juice. Okay? Intensity very low, build it up progressively, rebuild your core, and have a good pelvic floor physical therapist. So those are like the big, like the main guidelines for the postpartum return. And if we have to create some sort of timeline, this timeline is super general. Everybody's going to be on their own timeline, but just so we have a framework that we can kind of have a starting point for. For most women, like and maybe for some of you guys it's going to be even more than that, but 4 to 8 weeks after giving birth, you don't really need to think about going back in the gym, right? You're focusing on other stuff like we said, and you're going to start with light walking, breathing exercises, and then eventually some light core exercises, okay?
Your diastasis, like you said, your abs are kind of separating.
Yeah.
Do they naturally go back to their position?
To a certain extent they do, yeah. But if you do like more core training, the right core training, then it kind of solidifies that and reinforces that. Because remember, like if we're talking in the context of training is kind of challenging it. And so if you're gonna train, then you have to also train that to make sure that it's able to fight back in a sense, I guess. Okay? So kind of like during pregnancy, you want to avoid like light jumping, sprinting, stuff that's really intense, puts a lot of pressure, is high impact. You want to avoid at first like front ab exercises. Like when I was preparing for the presentation, I went on YouTube a little bit, and there's a lot of like postpartum like diastasis core training or whatever, and sometimes the stuff is like you're crunching, you're doing V-ups, you're this, you're that. It kind of looked like it was a random core exercise, and they just put like postpartum in the thumbnail type of deal. You wanna avoid that stuff, and you wanna focus on the same stuff we talked about at first. You're just teaching your core to create tension and resist motion, and slowly you're training it to stay tight as you move your extremities around. That may not mean much for you guys for now. We could do some demos after. Yes. Yeah, core, let's look at that after. core exercises. Any running or biking hard, any stuff that's really hard, initially you want to avoid. So that's 4 to 8 weeks, could be 12, right? But at that point, you can start to think about returning to training. Yeah.
Hard biking, like can I bike?
Yeah. Yeah, hard, like remember like our diagram here, like the red part, like yeah. Yeah, if you're, you can't talk, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're casual about it, you can definitely do it. Yeah. Okay? And then at some point you're gonna return to exercise. I put a list of stuff here with concepts, so we could just talk about it briefly, but if we have time after and you guys want, we could literally do like demonstrations of all of these exercises and touch on some of the core stuff like you were asking. Okay, so light core exercises, so bird dogs, dead bugs, side planks. You may not know what those mean, but you're essentially either on all fours, lying down on your back, maybe on your side. You're slowly moving your arms and your legs around. I'll demo afterwards if you guys want, but the name of the game here is that I'm in a position, I'm not moving, and I'm holding. Or I'm not moving and then I'm moving an arm, but I'm not moving what's going on down here. Okay? Can you see for the picture? That was good, yeah? Bridges and hip thrusts, so that's essentially stuff that's going to strengthen your glutes, your butt. Light hinging, right? So hinging essentially means, right, you are leaning over, so probably strengthening the stuff back here. And then, so if you're picking up your groceries, right? So if you want to do some light hinging, maybe you go to a grocery store, you grab everything, you go to Costco, and you do 100 of those. Lunges and squatting, upper back training. Remember we said rowing, you want to strengthen the muscles in the back. And then pecs, back, hip flexors in the front, stretching. So the same stretches that we talked about during pregnancy, you want to keep doing those. Okay? And so those are kind of stuff, and again, we can demo all of it after, but those are kind of stuff that you're going to do initially as your return. The point is, you're trying to rebuild your body, strengthen your core, strengthen all the muscles around your hip before you go do all the maybe a bit more crazy stuff that a more intense exercise program would have you do. Or that's a great kind of like phase 1 before going back, return to sport kind of thing. And then after that, you are not off to the races, but you're doing a more general strengthening program that's more akin to what you would have done prior to pregnancy. But there's some guidelines here, right? And you want to reintroduce exercises progressively, right? Always paying attention to bulging in the abs, feelings of wearing down below. And the way I think, and this is like my coaching brain that always looks at stuff that way, is you always want to reintroduce stuff in a step fashion, like in a block fashion. Like there's no harm in saying, okay, this is my training menu right now. I'm gonna do this stuff for the next 2, 3, 4 weeks, see how I feel, see how my body changes, see how things are improving. And then the next block, the next step, I'm gonna introduce a new layer of things. I'm gonna see how I do for a couple of weeks. And then I'm gonna keep ramping it up like that progressively. You don't need to do something brand new every single time you walk in the gym at that point and kind of relearn everything every single time. You wanna make sure that when you're doing stuff, you know where your abs are, you know where your butt are, right? We said we want all of this to support around my pelvic floor. So you want those things to be able to work when you're doing the squats or the push-ups or the likes. That's very, very important. So if we go back to the other stuff, like this is going to teach you to find your abs, it's going to teach you to use your butt, and then you take what you learned there and you carry it over into your regular training habits. And then another reminder, do your pelvic floor stuff from your pelvic floor PT. So very, very important. Big, broad recap of everything that we've talked about today. Make sure you exercise, very important. Keep the training intensity for the most part moderate. Challenge yourself more at the beginning if you feel ready for it. Allow yourself to have periodic bouts of intensity if you tolerate it. Respect and listen to your body, super, super important. And we taught you guys hopefully how to do that. Prioritize important recovery, growth, It's not time for performance. Fuel yourself for the task at hand. Talked about nutrition. And then return to exercise progressively, one step at a time. Time for the questions or the practical application, if you guys have any. Rock, paper, scissors.
Could you demonstrate some safe core exercises for pregnancy? Would it be that list that you gave for postpartum, like kind of similar?
They're very, it's pretty much the same thing,
Okay.
yeah. Especially towards the end of pregnancy. Like you're kind of doing the same stuff before you give birth and after you give birth. That being said, like if you consult the physical therapist, they may be able to give you like even more stuff that's even more specific to you in your exact situation. But yeah, we could do a few demos. Yeah, let's do it. You have a question?
I was just wondering about swimming. So do you see swimming as a good exercise in all trimesters, or?
Yeah, unless it for some reason it becomes contraindicated, I think it can be great, especially as you go further into your pregnancy, because then you're fighting even less against gravity. So there's a lot of like classes specifically for moms that are pregnant for fitness, and so that could definitely be a great way to get some movement in for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Going back to the swimming, that's actually something I love swimming. Like, you don't want to sit, not stretch, like while you're pregnant, you don't want to like stretch too much. Can you do like a backstroke, or is that not?
Yeah, it would be probably fine. And then what do you think we should do to figure out if it's okay or not okay? If you don't feel good, or maybe you're like in that position and you feel like your diastasis is like sinking in or bulging, you're looking at yourself and you're like, yeah, it's good or not, you know what I mean? Yeah. Yeah. But typically in those classes too, like they tell you exactly what to do, so they know like how to do it during pregnancy. I guess you guys are gonna have to let us know. Yeah. Anything else? So we do maybe some exercise demos in that case? Yeah. You guys are down? Yeah. Yes, okay. Let's go back to that list. We could kind of go through the entire list here. No, we're too far. Here. So, unsafe core exercises. Okay.
And this is after you've given birth.
Even during pregnancy.
Okay.
Like we said, like first trimester, you're kind of like, you don't have to change much, but you can start like limiting the stretching and stuff. But during and after, yeah. So stuff that's like extreme level of strain or like extreme level of movement, like obviously like eventually what you do is like the basic like crunch like this, like you guys see it, right? I'm like down here, so like second trimester plus, like probably not the best thing. Or like if I'm doing some sort of like a V up, like this is an alternating V up or like an actual V up, tough. Depending on where you're at, like this kind of stuff can start to be really stressful in front over here, and you're gonna see it right away. Like if you do that, like you're gonna see it. So those are the kind of movements that I would say skip out on. And then if we want to talk about stuff that's more safe, that you should be doing more. So stuff on your back is good because there's not a lot of like your relationship to gravity is pretty safe. Like everything is supported by the ground. So the dead bug one is one that I love a lot. So what does that look like? And don't ask me why it's called a dead bug. Maybe you see it, but you're here, right? And this is great too because you're training some muscles like the serratus, which is an important stabilizer muscle, which also helps with what's going on down here. You push to the ceiling, you're here. You want to keep like a neutral position. You don't want to be too arched. You don't want to be too crunched, right? So you're here. And then what I do, like super easy, I do this, which is extra easy, right? Just trying to keep control of that while I'm moving that. Harder, now I do it with my leg, right? And what I don't want to do, I don't want to do this and super arch. I want to be here, keep all of this stuff the same, keep it tight, then extend the leg. Or, even harder, I extend all the way, and come back. So it's similar to the other one that we were talking about, but in a less stressful way, right? And then if I want to make it like the hardest variation, right? I alternate the arm and the leg here, okay? And then the other thing you want to do when you do that is you want to feel your abs. And when you guys, after pregnancy, after you guys gave birth, you get back to training your core, like you'll know. Like you'll know, like as soon as you extend your leg, you're like, oh my God, I just lost everything. Like I can't hold it. And it's probably like gonna be shocking. You're gonna be like, especially if you did that stuff before and you're doing it after, you're gonna realize like, oh my God, like there's really like not a lot of strength here. So you go progressively. That's why like we're spending 5 minutes on one exercise, but I think you guys will get the idea here in terms of progression. You start super easy. My heel's barely like tapping in front of my butt. I make it a bit harder, and eventually I go all the way out. Cool? You could do the same thing here. So again, and that's even better for my shoulders because now I'm actually working. Push my shoulders, right? That would be the bird dog one. Now, super important to mention, like every time I see somebody do a bird dog, I see this. It's like, what's happening here? I'm just mega arching. I'm just like everything that should be tight is now super stretched. So that's not the point here. The point is I'm here. I keep this in the same position while extending my hip and stretching my leg. Right? So a good cue, like what I do typically with people is you put your foot on a towel, like a small towel, and you just slide it. And you can lift a bit at the end if you want. You come back in, and that's a great way to feel what it should feel like to do it properly. And on the side, so if I'm here, maybe I start on my knees, and that's a great one too to practice breathing, right? So I'm here, breathe through my nose. I like the open mouth sigh kind of thing. So you fog up a mirror, so you go, and you start here. Eventually maybe, or maybe not even, maybe you'll start here and you'll be like your elbow on the couch or something like that. That's gonna make it easier. Then you go all the way down to the ground, stuff like that. So you're resisting movement instead of creating movement, essentially. So those would be examples of simple ones that you could do.
Okay.
And if you kind of attack the basics of finding tension here, and you do those over and over again, and that's really good. Another one that you could do, like if I had like an elastic band, imagine I have an elastic band, I tie it to this, and then I'm here, and then I have to push against it. Because what's happening is when I'm here, my arms are long, so it becomes harder. The elastic band wants me to do this. And so I'm fighting against the resistance of the elastic band, and then instead of training the rotation, I'm training to resist the rotation. And when I'm able to do that and also control for avoiding bulging or pressure, like we said, then you can start to incorporate a bit of movement in there as well. And so now you're training to resist that kind of flexion extension. You're training to resist like that lateral thing that we talked about with the side plank, and you're also training to resist rotation. So you're working your core in like all these different planes. And so you have plenty to work with like as a baseline with those ones. As for the core, now we talked about the hip thrust and the butt before, right? So stuff like this, where you're here and you lift up, right? What am I doing here? I'm getting this guy to work, okay? And so again, you want to try to do it without arching your back too much. So you want to keep it tight and you want to press. I like also for this to like grab like a light, like a yoga block or a foam roller or maybe a pillow even, and you squeeze it. So you're using the muscles on the inside of your thigh, your adductor, and so you're getting these guys to work too, which are like super like neglected muscles, we could say. So you're here, and then you drive through, and you can use these guys doing so. What did we talk about? We talked about hinging. So that was the grocery bag stuff, right? So light weights, start with your 10 pounds. Eventually though, you definitely graduate from the 10 pounds. I'll do it here. Let's put our hands on our, trying to find a good weight for you guys to see how to do it properly, but you put your hands on your thighs, push your butt back, and then you come and you cover your knees. Right, if I'm holding weights, like I'm around here or something, and so I'm using all this stuff in the back here, and then when I stand up, then they're working. And so that's a really, really good one. Like we said, we want this guy and that guy to take most of the load. We don't want the pelvic floor to be doing all of the work.
So like a slow stand up, not like a pump.
Everything at first is like isolated and like focusing on the feeling. And eventually you can add speed to it. Lunging and squats are stuff that you're familiar with, and they're super good, right? Because if the one I did on the floor with the bridge is going to train your glute in what we call like their short position, like you're making it squeeze. When I'm lunging, now I'm stretching it. And so you're training it in a completely different way. And so it's a great way to kind of balance it out. A squat would kind of look like this, right? And there's a bunch of variations. I could do it on the side like this and whatnot. And then rowing activities, my 10-pound weights. I am against the couch if I'm training from home. I'm supported here. I'm really tall, so I'd probably be like this. And then you're rowing. If you have your bands, you're maybe rowing here, right? And you're pulling against it. Like, don't be super worried about, like, then you'll see some stuff like you got to pack your shoulders down and back and like, just row. Like literally just row, okay? And it's gonna do the job. And then those were the ones that we had on the list, but I mean, we talked about like a whole day of training. Like, do you guys wanna see what a day of training could look like? Like, do you guys have any questions surrounding all this stuff? Oh, we could do the stretches too if you want, the stretches. Yeah? Okay, so, pecs. Like this. Pull your shoulder back, face away. You're stretching the front side of your shoulder. We said shoulders want to go here. I'm going to make the shoulders go there. You can stretch it like this. We're going to stretch hip flexors. Let's do hip flexors at the end because it's a tougher one. How can I stretch my upper back? You want to create rotation. 2 ways that you can create rotation. Can you guys still see me here? Yeah? Rotation this way. Right? Rotation this way. Right? So I'm trying to open up and stretch my upper back like this. If you have a foam roller at home or something like that, you can lie on it and you can stretch and open up. Like, it's not a big exercise, so it's okay if you like stretch a little bit, no issues there. And so those are ways you can stretch your upper back. What I typically like to do though is like, I'll lie down my back. Like, I'll be here maybe like this, and then you call that like an open book. Like this one you're gonna see, like you're opening the book. That's a great one to open up the upper back like this. Then front side of the hip is tougher sometimes. Like just a general quad exercise is good here. Or like Google like a couch stretch or something like that. A variation of those where you're sitting down here and you're stretching the front side of the hip. But then if you want to stretch your hip flexors, the thing about hip flexors is that they're kind of like, they're tough to do properly in the sense that like, if you're, I'll do it like this. If you're doing a hip flexor, right? We said, because of my posture, right? I'm arched all the time. This stuff can get tight in here. So if you want to stretch it, essentially what you have to do is you have to open up this part. So you have to really tuck your hips under. You have to tuck like this. And then when you're tucked like that, like this, you want to push forward. Why I say it's weird is because like this can easily become that. And then what I'm doing is I'm just arching here, but or like this, like I'm arching here, but I'm not really doing anything front side. So that's more you have to be a little bit more cautious about. But if you do like something like this, you pull one leg up, which kind of keeps your hips like set, your pelvis is in a more neutral position, and then you try to stretch here, you're gonna get it. But I can already see how this could become problematic when you have a big belly, you know? Anything else? No? Where are we at on time? I mean, we still have a few minutes. Catherine.
For those who like double unders or skipping rope, just when can you reintroduce this, and like what can you do to help you get back to it?
That's a really good question. So double unders or skipping rope. Double unders is like an intense version of the skipping rope. So like when every time I jump, the rope goes twice under my feet. So you got to jump higher. So more impact. When do I reintroduce that? And how do I reintroduce it? So how to make sure that I'm good to go is to do your core stuff, your glute stuff, and your pelvic floor PT stuff, your physical therapist. That stuff is crucial for doing the initial work to get you back to jumping. And then I actually had a client recently go through that process, so we could talk about what she did. She's actually my physical therapist, and I was doing her training when she was going back to training. And the first thing, and you're gonna see it's very similar, but the first few things that she did were like, you're kind of taking that movement and you're breaking it down into its more like simple components. So the first thing she was doing is she would step up on like a small box like this. And prior to that, she did like all of her like core control stuff. So she knew how she felt when her core was engaged and when she wasn't bearing down. So she knew how that felt. And so she would step on the box and then just jump down, practice landing, was able to control. Yes, no, check, stand back up on the box, practice, and repeat. And she would kind of do that, like you call it like in a superset, like she'd do like her set of squats, then during her rest period, she'd go practice her landing. And she would do that on one day, and then on the other day when she was ready, she would do what we call a pogo jump. So essentially, it's like a skipping rope jump without the skipping rope. So you start like super light. And so she's practicing the movement of jumping and landing and rebounding, and she's seeing how she feels and if she has pressure down below or anything like that. And then when that was feeling good, we actually went a little bit harder plyos before we went to the jump rope, just because so let's say like she's doing that, but she's doing it higher, or maybe she's jumping forward, because then her focus is still on what's going on here and not like what's happening there. And then, okay, even more challenging stuff, I'm able to manage pressure and all. Okay, now I can try to jump rope again. And you could do like a similar thing too with like running. Like start with light plyos, stuff that you can control, and start like, okay, now I have control of everything that's going on. I'm gonna go walk, I'm gonna run for 15 seconds, then I'm gonna walk, monitor what's going on, and progressively reintroduce it. That was a good one. Anything else? No?
Well, I recently kind of started taking up pickleball.
So, sorry, say again?
I've recently started taking up pickleball.
Okay.
And
We're no longer friends.
Uh-oh.
Tennis and football.
Oh yeah, I didn't know.
Tennis, yeah. So, like, I find I bend over a lot. Like, that's fine, right? Kind of, that's it.
Describe me the situation.
Because I'm not, like, the best, and my partner either. So, like, they don't maybe shoot it super high like tennis. I find you stand up a little more, but
Yeah.
with pickleball, I'm like I'm bending over. And I know it's going to get harder.
Yeah,
But, like, that's fine.
yeah.
Like, I can run around and do that type of movement. It's not going to...
Yeah, what I'm thinking is it's gonna soon enough like start to look like a really aggressive crunching motion. Remember like we said like for the core, like so in that case I would be like try to like do these things at home and see like okay, like what happens to my diastasis or whatever when I'm here, like am I like getting like a lot of bulging, or I'm like, but probably like high speed, all of this and moving quick and that, like eventually like it's gonna, and also I can imagine that eventually it's gonna probably be hard to reach there anyways, and your body is gonna like force you to maybe take a break or something like that too,
So just, like,
follow your body. I would say, yeah, and I would say, like, in worst case, you stay on the side of caution. You know, you're like, okay, like second trimester, whatever. Maybe I'll do something else. Yeah.
That's what I do.
Okay, thank you.
No? Good? Excellent, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. If ever you guys have questions or anything else, like this is my stuff and I put my email address here. So we recorded that. So if you guys want the video to review or you want to share with somebody you know that could benefit, I'll send it to you. It'll be my pleasure. Or if you have any questions, I can email. Like I'll be happy to answer questions at any time. Like I said, it'll be my pleasure.